Jeff Bridges stopped mid-sentence. His eyes left Jimmy's face. And when he saw the photograph being held up in the audience, everything changed. It was a typical Tuesday night taping of The Tonight Show starring Jimmy Fallon. The audience was energized, laughing at Jimmy's monologue, applauding the musical guests. Everything was running smoothly, the kind of effortless television that looks easy but requires perfect coordination between dozens of moving parts. Jeff Bridges was tonight's main guest. The legendary actor, beloved for decades of iconic performances, had walked onto the stage to thunderous applause wearing his signature casual elegance, a sport coat over a simple shirt, that relaxed demeanor that had made him one of Hollywood's most genuine stars. Jimmy greeted him with his usual enthusiasm. They shook hands. Jeff settled into the orange guest chair with that easy smile audiences had loved since the 1970s. The interview began exactly as planned. Questions about his latest project, stories from the set, the comfortable rhythm of two professionals who'd done this dance before. "So Jeff," Jimmy said, glancing at his blue note cards, "I heard something incredible happened during filming. Something with the crew that you said changed the whole experience for you. Can you tell us about that?" Jeff leaned back in his chair, that familiar storytelling mode settling over him. "Yeah, man, it was wild. We were shooting this scene in Montana, middle of nowhere, and our key grip, guy named Marcus, he had this old." And then Jeff stopped. Not a natural pause. Not the kind of stop that happens when you're searching for the right word. This was abrupt. Complete. Like someone had hit a mute button mid-sentence. His eyes, which had been looking at Jimmy with warm engagement, suddenly shifted. Past Jimmy. Past the cameras. Toward the audience seating area on his right. Jimmy noticed immediately. His smile faltered slightly. "Jeff? You okay?" Jeff didn't respond. He was staring at something in the audience, his relaxed posture gone rigid. His hand gripped the armrest of the guest chair, knuckles turning white. The audience sensed a shift. 300 people who had been leaning back in their seats, enjoying the casual celebrity interview, suddenly sat forward. What was happening? Jimmy stopped mid-joke. The entire studio froze. In the fifth row of the audience seating, slightly to the right, sat a woman in her 60s. She had gray hair pulled back in a neat bun, wearing a simple cardigan. In her trembling hands, raised just high enough to be visible over the heads in front of her, was a photograph. An old photograph. Even from the stage, even in the studio lighting, you could tell it was decades old, the faded colors, the worn edges, the quality that belonged to a different era of photography. Jeff Bridges was staring at that photograph like it had reached across the studio and grabbed him by the throat. Jimmy glanced at his producers in the wings, uncertain. This wasn't in the script. This wasn't a planned bit. Something real was happening, and nobody knew what to do. "Jeff?" Jimmy tried again, his voice softer now, genuinely concerned. What are you looking at?" Jeff's jaw worked silently. His eyes had filled with tears. Actual tears, visible even to the cameras, glistening under the studio lights. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, rough with emotion. "That photograph. Where did you get that photograph?" The woman in the fifth row stood up slowly. The audience members around her shifted to let her move, sensing something significant was unfolding. She held the photograph higher, her own voice shaking as she spoke loud enough to be heard across the studio. "Mr. Bridges, my name is Eleanor Chen. This is a picture of my husband, Thomas Chen. You knew him as Tommy." Jeff's hand flew to his mouth. The tears spilled over. Jimmy Fallon, master of keeping shows moving, of maintaining energy and momentum, sat completely still behind his desk, his hands flat on the wooden surface, watching his guest fall apart in real time. The cameras stayed on Jeff's face. The control room had stopped shouting. No one was cutting to commercial. Everyone understood. From the director to the cameraman to the boom operators, that they were witnessing something that transcended entertainment. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. To understand what happened next, you need to understand what happened 42 years earlier. Jeff Bridges wasn't always Jeff Bridges, Oscar-winning actor and Hollywood icon. In 1982, he was a 32-year-old working actor with a growing reputation but nothing close to the legendary status he'd achieved later. He'd been in good films, gotten solid reviews, but was still fighting to be taken seriously beyond being Lloyd Bridges' son. That summer, he was shooting a film in Seattle. A small production, modest budget, the kind of movie that might disappear without much notice or might become a cult classic. You never knew which until it was too late to matter. The film's gaffer, the chief lighting technician, was a guy named Tommy Chen. 20 years old. First-generation Chinese-American. Brilliant with lighting, the kind of technical artist who could make a tiny budget look like a major production through sheer skill and creativity. Tommy and Jeff became friends during that shoot. Not the surface-level set friendship that evaporates when production wraps, but real friendship. They'd grab beers after long days. They'd talk about more than just movies, about life, about what it meant to be Asian American in a predominantly white industry, about the pressure of family expectations, about dreams and compromises. Tommy had dreams beyond being a gaffer. He wanted to direct. He had notebooks filled with ideas, storyboards he'd drawn in the margins of lighting plots, stories he wanted to tell about his family's immigration experience, about the Seattle community where he'd grown up. "You're going to make it, man," Jeff would tell him, sitting in dive bars at midnight after 16-hour shooting days. "I can tell. You've got the eye. You see things other people don't see. Maybe," Tommy would say with that self-deprecating smile, "or maybe I'll just be the guy making other people's visions look good. That's okay too. As long as I'm in the room, you know? As long as I'm part of making something." The last day of production was a Friday. They'd finished early. Miracle of miracles in independent filmmaking. The crew was celebrating, making plans to hit a local bar, already starting to feel that bittersweet sadness of a production family about to disperse. Tommy pulled Jeff aside. "Hey man, I need to skip the bar tonight. Eleanor, my wife, we're heading to the hospital. Baby's on the way. Little early, but the doctors say everything's looking good." Jeff grabbed him in a huge hug. "Holy shit! Congratulations! Get out of here! Go meet your kid!" "I'll send you a picture," Tommy promised, already heading for his car. "And when you win your Oscar someday, you better thank the gaffer who made you look good in Seattle. When you win yours," Jeff called after him, "I'll be in the front row." Tommy Chen never made it to the hospital. His car was hit by a drunk driver 6 blocks from the production office. He died instantly. Never got to meet his daughter. Never got to hold Eleanor's hand during the delivery. Never got to direct his first film. Jeff found out the next morning. He was packing up his hotel room, getting ready to fly back to Los Angeles, when the production coordinator called. He remembered dropping the phone. He remembered sitting on the hotel bed for 3 hours, unable to move, unable to process that his friend, vibrant, talented, full of dreams Tommy, was just gone. He went to the funeral. Saw Eleanor, heavily pregnant, sitting in the front row of the church, surrounded by Tommy's family, trying to be strong. He wanted to say something to her. Wanted to tell her that Tommy had talked about her constantly, had been so excited about the baby, had loved her so much. But what words could possibly matter? What could he say that wouldn't sound hollow? So he said nothing. He paid his respects. He left. And he carried the guilt of that silence for 42 years. Behind the scenes, Fallon made a decision that defied every producer's expectation. The studio was still frozen. Eleanor Chen stood in the 5th row, still holding the photograph. Jeff sat in the guest chair, tears streaming down his face, his usual composed actor's mask completely shattered. Jimmy Fallon stood up. Not the performative standing he did for comedy bits or musical performances. This was different. Deliberate. He stepped out from behind his desk and walked toward Eleanor in the audience. The cameras followed him. The audience parted slightly, creating a path. Jimmy reached the fifth row and gently gestured for Eleanor to come forward. "Mrs. Chen," he said softly, his own voice thick with emotion. "Would you come up here? I think you and Jeff need to talk." Eleanor nodded, unable to speak. Another audience member, a younger woman sitting beside her, clearly her daughter, took her arm and helped her navigate the steps down to the main floor. Jimmy walked with them, protective, guiding them toward the stage. Jeff had stood up from the guest chair. He was gripping the back of it for support, watching Eleanor approach, his face a mask of grief and regret and something else, maybe hope, maybe fear, maybe both. Eleanor reached the stage. Her daughter helped her up the steps. Jeff took 2 unsteady steps toward her. They stood facing each other. Jeff Bridges, movie star, and Eleanor Chen, widow of the gaffer he'd worked with 42 years ago. The photograph was still in her hands. "I'm sorry," Jeff said, the words breaking as they left his mouth. "I'm so sorry. I should have, at the funeral, I wanted to tell you. I didn't know what to say. I've thought about it every day since. Every single day." Eleanor was crying now too. "He loved working with you. Did you know that? He came home every night talking about you. About how kind you were. How you treated everyone on set like they mattered." "He mattered," Jeff said fiercely. "He was brilliant. He should have gotten to direct. He should have gotten to meet." He stopped, looking at the younger woman standing beside Eleanor. "Is that?" Eleanor nodded. "This is my daughter, Melissa. She's 42. She never got to meet her father." Jeff looked at Melissa, who had Tommy's eyes, who was the age Tommy had been when he died. And something in him broke further. But this is the moment no one in the studio, and no one watching at home, ever saw coming. Jimmy Fallon had been standing off to the side, giving them space. Now he stepped forward with something in his hand, his blue note cards, the ones he used for every interview, covered in his own handwriting. "Jeff," Jimmy said quietly, "I know this isn't. I know we're off script here. But maybe that's okay. Maybe that's what needs to happen." He looked at Eleanor and Melissa. "Mrs. Chen, would you tell us about Tommy? About what he was like? Because I think everyone here," he gestured to the audience, to the cameras, to the world watching, "needs to hear about him." Eleanor looked at the photograph in her hands. Then she looked up at the cameras, at the lights, at the Tonight Show stage that Tommy would have loved to work on someday. "Tommy was a dreamer," she said, her voice growing stronger. "He was brilliant with lights. He could make magic with shadows and angles. But what he really wanted was to tell stories. About our community. About immigration. About what it means to be American when America doesn't always see you." She turned to Jeff. "After he died, I found his notebooks. Years of ideas. Storyboards. Scripts he'd started writing. He never showed them to anyone because he was afraid they weren't good enough. They were good enough," Jeff said with absolute certainty. "If Tommy thought of them, they were good enough." Jimmy had been listening, his own eyes wet with tears. Now he did something that would define his legacy as more than just a comedian. He took off his suit jacket and draped it gently over Eleanor's shoulders. "Mrs. Chen, Melissa," Jimmy said, his voice steady despite the emotion. "Tommy's story deserves to be told. And Jeff," he turned to his guest, "I think you've been carrying this long enough." Jeff nodded, unable to speak. He reached out and took the photograph from Eleanor's hands. He looked at it, young Tommy Chen on a film set, holding a light meter, grinning at the camera with all the hope in the world. "I'm going to make sure his notebooks get to someone who can use them," Jeff said. "Someone who will tell those stories. I promise you that." Eleanor and Melissa both embraced him. The 3 of them stood on the Tonight Show stage, holding each other, while 300 audience members stood and applauded. Not the excited applause of entertainment, but the quiet, reverent applause of witnessing forgiveness and redemption. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. Jeff kept his promise. He donated Tommy's notebooks to a film school scholarship program for Asian American students. The first recipient directed a short film about her grandfather's immigration story. It won Sundance. The photograph sits in Jeff's home office now, next to his Oscar. And Jimmy's jacket? Eleanor had it framed with a note. For the host who stopped the show when it mattered most.